Well, I am so excited and happy to be speaking with you all today. Obviously, I wish we were in person, but as 2020 goes, we've had to be a little bit flexible. And I'll just let you know that there are some people in this room, so if I do look over to the left or right, that is why. I'm not looking off into space. There are people here. As I said earlier, that 2020 has been a year of difficulties and changes. And I think for a lot of people, it's been a gut check as to what is satisfying and what is essential to life. I know we've heard that term a lot, essential workers, essential activities. And as I begin to reflect on this past year, there have been a lot of things that have come to my mind that I considered to be essential, but in all reality, they aren't. And so I hope that as I talk the next few minutes, that we can take a glance at what we rely on, and then look and see who we should be relying on. A couple years ago, I went to college and I played college volleyball. And I am an athlete and I'm very competitive. The simplest games, I get very competitive and I want to win. So after a game, we all went out to eat as a team. We sit down and I was so thirsty. I could not stop drinking, and anything just looked so satisfying. So we hadn't even sat really down in our seats. And I immediately looked at the waiter and I was like, please bring me something to drink. And I said, can you bring me some Sprite? Because the college was paying for it, so I could get whatever Coke I wanted. I wasn't about to get some water. Also, I didn't really care about my health back then. So I just started guzzling the Sprite. And eventually that waiter came and he was like, if you're so thirsty, why don't you just get water? And he kind of said it as a joke and everyone kind of laughed. And it kind of ticked me off because one, he was right. But also like, I didn't want him to tell me what to do. But it was so true. As soon as I was like, okay, bring me water. And as soon as I drank the water, I really wasn't that thirsty anymore because water satisfies the quench that I had. And I think in life, we go to a lot of Sprite to satisfy us, but in all reality, there's only water, Jesus, that can quench that thirst. And I would like to speak on a story that you are probably familiar with if you've grown up at church for any length of time. You've probably heard a story similar to this. So if you would go to your Bible to John 4, we're going to look at this passage and we'll dwell on a little bit of the aspect of the woman at the well. So in John 4, John 4:4, it says, and he must needs go through Samaria. Then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of the ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman saith unto him, sir, hast thou nothing to draw with? And the well is deep. From whence then hast thou living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself and his children and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman at the well, it's a popular story, like I said, that we have grown up listening to and hearing, being taught. And in this passage, Jesus is going through Samaria. He sits down at this well. In verse 6, it notes of him being weary with his journey. I think that's a good point that John points out of Jesus being man as well as God. So he's tired. He sits at this well, and up walks this Samaritan woman. And this woman is immediately confused as to why this Jewish man is talking to her. First off, she is Samaritan, and as the Bible clearly states, Samaritans and Jews, they didn't get along, they didn't speak, but also he's a rabbi, and rabbis would not engage in conversation with women publicly in that culture and in that time. But Jesus, being Jesus, he is doing what he is constantly doing in his ministry, and he's reaching out to those who he shouldn't be talking to by social standards. She asked Jesus in verse 11, "Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water?" It's almost skeptical, like, you don't even have a bucket. Where are you going to get this living water that you're talking about? Jesus is very clearly not talking about the literal water in that well, but about the unquenchable thirst in this lady's life, which just happens to be her relationship with her husbands. And yes, I said husbands, not just one. And if we're honest with ourselves, we too have wells in our lives that we're constantly running to that never really fill us up. Yet we trick ourselves only every time by running back to those same wells and looking for the same results. We're looking for them to quench our thirst, but they won't, because they do not have what Jesus has. Let's look at the woman just for a minute. And we have some facts that the Bible gives us about this lady. And growing up, maybe like me, you kind of have a picture of who she is. But I want us to look a little bit deeper, because I think sometimes the facts that we hear growing up, one, become a little bit callous and mundane if you just hear them over and over and again. But also, I think we kind of have a false narrative of exactly who this woman is. For starters, let's look at what time she goes to the well. It says in verse, verse 6, and it was about the 6th hour, which would have been noon, okay? But back in Genesis 24:11, it says, speaking of Jacob's well, it says, "And he made his camels to kneel down without the city by a well of water at the time of the evening, even the time that women go out to draw water." It very clearly states what time the women normally go out to collect water, which is in the evening, not at noon. And the wells, when the women would go to the wells, it was very much a social setting. This is where they would catch up at the end of the day. They were talking about chit-chat and what they saw at the neighbor's house, and it was very much a social gathering. And then also, the reason that they would go at evening or maybe early in the morning, it's not as hot. It's a preferred time. It's not as much demand on their body carrying those big water jugs if they go in the cool of the evening. Here this lady is coming in the heat of the day. And after reading several commentaries about this passage, a lot of the commentaries would agree that there is a good chance that the well that this lady is going to is not even the closest well to where she lived physically. So she's purposely passed by the well that is easiest for her to go to and that no one else would be at that she would know. It tells us she doesn't want to see anyone she knows, but she also doesn't want to be seen by anyone that she knows. This passage also mentions that she was married 5 different times. And for whatever reason, I've always pictured, like I said earlier, a young lady who looks like in her mid-20s, and for whatever reason, almost kind of risque, if I'm being honest, because the Bible says that she's been married 5 times, or that she has had 5 husbands. And maybe that's because of the flannel graphs that I've seen growing up as far as the young woman, and she's holding a picture with Jesus in the white glowy robes, and she's just resting at his feet and listening to his words. But actually, if we do some rough math, emphasis on the rough because I hate math, let's just say that this lady got married at 15, which sounds crazy to us, but in that day, that was very normal. And let's say she was married 5 years tops, with each of her 5 husbands. Then that would roughly put her at about 40 years old. And that's with the rough math, okay? She could have been married to one guy for 10 years, for another guy, 10 months. There's so much to the story that we just don't know about this lady. And I'm not sure why, but when I read in verse 18, when Jesus says, "For thou hast 5 husbands," I always associate divorce with all 5 of those marriages. But we don't really know that at all. We know she had 5 husbands, but what if 3 of those husbands had died? In that culture, a woman's value was placed on whether or not she could bear children, specifically a son. And if she was barren, the husband then had legal rights in Jewish law to divorce her. So what if she was barren and did not have the ability to bear kids? And because of that, her husband just abandoned her. We don't know that. That could be the case. That could not be the case. To this day, in Africa, I've visited Rwanda several times, women are often abandoned by their husbands, and the blame is not at all put on the husband, but rather the wife or the girl. This woman could have just been abandoned by her husband or by multiple husbands. We don't know. There's truly so much we do not know about this woman. And I think there's actually a lot of heartbreak to this story that we may have never heard. And we may be guilty of creating a narrative that's simply just not true. In preparation for this, I did just a couple Google searches of the woman at the well. I wanted to see what Google had to offer. And the pictures were interesting, to say the least. There was one where Jesus looked like he was wearing like a muumuu with lots of colors and glitter. And to me, that didn't quite settle well. There were several with the woman, like I said, eagerly sitting at the feet of Jesus. And while that might be true later on in the story, I don't think that's how it was when Jesus first interacted with this woman. Then I came across one that had the woman at the well, and Jesus walked up to her. But in verse 6, it clearly states that Jesus was waiting for her before she even got there. Jesus was waiting for her at that well. What I think is probably a more accurate image is a lady in her mid-40s with signs of age and maybe sadness on her face, a face that has a lot of stories to tell. And I personally highly doubt she walked right up to Jesus. Matter of fact, I think if anything, she was very cautious because after all, she was a Samaritan woman. But based on her conversation with Jesus and her lifestyle choices, no matter how many marriages had ended, she is hoping that the next one will be the right one. Because while this conversation is taking place, she is with another man that is not even her husband. She keeps trying to quench her thirst with the very thing that has left her disappointed 5 times over. You would think, in my mind, I would think, wow, is she ever going to learn? But then Jesus so quickly points that back at me. Because I too have wells that I run to over and over and over again, thinking this time, this time, and they never satisfy. Surely the next marriage will be enough. Surely the next one will feel right. The next one will satisfy my desires, but that's just not the case. I'm sure she didn't have dreams of being married 5 times. This woman just wanted to be loved. And I feel like I can relate to her more than I want to because I too am the woman at the well. I'm always looking for other things to tell me that I'm enough. Whether it's opening Instagram and constantly checking on the likes or followers I have, or making sure that particular person liked that particular post, okay? Don't act like you guys don't do that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I am then asking my phone to tell me who I am and that I'm enough. And because I'm a single girl, am I going to let guys tell me that I'm enough? Or my friends tell me that I'm enough? Or at my job, if I hit a certain quota or get my boss's approval on a big project, will that then mean I'm enough? What about once I hit a certain number in my bank account? Am I then enough? It's just never true. There has never been another well that I have come across that quenches my first thirst for approval like Jesus. I run to things that I'm asking for them to quench my thirst, and they just keep being Sprite. It tastes sweet and it tastes good for a second, then in minutes leaves me just as thirsty as I once was. My brokenness will take me back to the same wells over and over and over again until I realize that those wells will not satisfy. We cannot change the constant cycle of disappointment and thirsting until we realize those wells will not satisfy. Maybe you're constantly changing jobs, cars, houses, friend groups, because you've convinced yourself the next change will satisfy. And while those things are not inherently bad, okay, it's good to have a job, it's good to have a house, it's good to have money, it's It's good to have great friends. Just don't ask those things to quench your thirst, because they will disappoint you every single time. Jesus is the living water, and it's only Jesus, and that sounds so cliche, but until you realize that, you're going to be disappointed every time. John 6:35, Jesus is speaking, and he says, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. In order to be quenched of our thirst that the Bible speaks about, we have to believe that he is overwhelmingly enough for us. And that is different for all of us, okay? I have different wells in my life that I run to, and you probably have something different that you run to, that you're constantly trying to get satisfied that might not at all be an issue for me, okay? So we all have different aspects of our life. The amazing thing about Jesus is that all we have to do is go to him and ask ourselves and ask him, where are we running to that we are trying to get satisfied, yet we get disappointed? If you're anything like me, you already know exactly where those wells are. In your life, you know where you go to get satisfied, and yet you're disappointed. And the terrifying yet amazing thing about Jesus is he already knows every single well that you have gone to, that I have gone to, just like that Samaritan woman. Remember, he got to the well before the Samaritan woman did. You've got to believe that he has seen it all, and he is still wanting you, and he's waiting for you. Later on in the passage in John 4:27, it says, And upon this came his disciples, and marveled that he had talked with this woman. Yet no man said, What seekest thou, or why talkest thou to her? At this point, the disciples knew, he shouldn't be talking to this woman. Come on, Jesus, she's a Samaritan woman. But yet none of them questioned it either. They were like, well, yeah, sounds about right, okay? But later on, if you continue to read, it says in John 4:28 through verse 30, The woman then left her water pot, and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come, see a man which told me all the things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came unto him. She immediately leaves the water jug, the very thing that she is depending on for her to never thirst again, and goes straight to the place where she is not welcomed. And why is that? It's because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. She goes back into her town and immediately tells her testimony of what God has done, and urges those same people who have rejected her for so long to also come hear the good news of the gospel. When you know you are overwhelmingly accepted, living water flows out of you. You can then be brave with your testimony and your story to bring others to him. John 4:14 says, But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water, springing up into everlasting life. So this woman goes into the town and tells of Jesus' work in her life, and the Samaritans believe her. And they later on in the passage in John 4:39 through 42, it says, And many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman, which testified, He told me all that ever I did. So when the Samaritans were come unto him, they besought him that he would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. And many more believed because of his own word, and said unto the woman, so this is the group that rejected that woman time and time again. They are now going to her and saying, Now we believe, not because of thy saying, or not because of what the Samaritan woman was saying, for we have heard him ourselves, and know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world. We don't have to have the right answers. We just have to share our story of how Jesus constantly satisfies us. So as we go into the new year, and we leave 2020 behind us and all of its craziness, let us take some time to reflect on what are the wells in your life that you're constantly running to, and you're constantly asking them to quench the thirst that they just can't. As we go into this new year with a clear approach of who can truly satisfy us, I think if we get that perspective right, God can use us in amazing ways because we are seeking His approval. We won't have to constantly be thirsting if we go to the right well, the well that has the living water. And although I believe that Jesus, He saved me from sin and death, I think He is constantly having to renew me and rescue me from my sinful nature. So this is not a one and done thing. This isn't a, Jesus, take this well from me. And He very well could. And I hope and pray that's the case. But we are sinners and we are constantly sinning and we are constantly running back to that well. So while I do believe, like I said, that once you are saved from death and hell, I think we are constantly having to remind ourselves of the well that does satisfy and the wells that do not. And maybe your prayer can be that of, God, please take that away. And while God can do that, the devil is very much alive as well. And he will bring those wells back into your life to trick you again. Let's ask God to satisfy our souls and give us the courage to be a testimony for others so that we can then bring others to that same living water.